All right, I basically feel giddy with the day so far and how it has gone and the incredible people that we have had here in this room speaking to us and with us. Just incredible, right? Right? We are going to keep the energy. We are going to keep the energy going up. And what better people to do that with than the individuals we have here to my right, Deena Hurwitz. So I'm going to say a few things about them to get started. But before I do, just remember, I saw some great networking at lunch, and people were giving me foul stares because I was moving them along. But, understood, I get it. But there will be opportunity to network after this, right? There's another reception. We'll be back down to Dockside. Please stick around and do that. Keep making the connections. Kindness, generosity, humanity abounds. All right, good. So we are so thrilled with what is about to happen. Deena Hurwitz, she is class of '96. She is with us today to have a conversation with Dahlia. And she has spent her legal career in international human rights. She's a human rights consultant based in Charlottesville, Virginia. She founded the International Human Rights Clinic at the University of Virginia School of Law, where she taught for over 12, 13 years. Yes. So she and her expertise is, internationally renowned. So we're so happy to have her here. She's also a senior fellow at Fergie, and she has the pleasure of working with Martha Davis. So many of us. It's fantastic. All right, well, thank you, Deena. We appreciate all the time and the effort. And we have Dahlia Lithwick. I'm really jumping up and down. I don't know. So I was saying to Dahlia last night that we received some serious fan notes from folks in this audience about how excited they were that she was going to be here today. And what can I say to introduce her? She has an awesome podcast, Amicus, that you all should start listening to if you don't already. Smart, funny, topical. And as Dahlia said last night, it's like the news is changing every 15 minutes. Right. So she can barely keep on top of it, but she manages to have these great guests. She's a great interviewer. So please listen if you haven't already. She is the author of an awesome book that you all now own. And that's going to be a discussion here today. I know a few of you actually brought your books from home to have her signed, not realizing you were going to get another one in your swag bag, so that's awesome. She writes a column for Slate on the Supreme Court, and she has won many awards. And we're so, so grateful and honored that she's here with us today. So thank you, Dahlia. And I will leave it to the two of you.
Thank you. Now it's on? Take this one.
Switch it back.
This one keeps going in and out.
Okay. This one goes in and out?
Does this one? Well, let me start by also thanking I'm going to say Siri, and Amy and
Julia.
Oh my God! Excuse me. Okay. The threesome and the fourth. Meow. Thank you so much for organizing this. A lot of people are talking about opening with a singer, which was really touching. It was a wonderful way to open a conference like this. So thank you for doing that, for planning that. I want to take a moment to recall two things that Umi said last night in her talk. One was to remember and bring to our heart Hope Lewis, who was the reason that I came to Northeastern. She was and still is an amazing person, and she's here with us. I don't want to just say that we miss her, but she's definitely here with us. And the other is that you said was that joy is an act of resistance. and I left there and I was sort of groveling and grumpy and saying, I don't feel like very, very joyful. In fact, Dahlia and I were talking about how we're going to be Debbie Downers in this panel. We will try very, very hard not to. Well, it won't end with that. We will definitely not end with the down stuff. But I do feel a lot of rage and frustration. So I'm going to have to be talking a little bit about that. But to start with, I want to say that I want to celebrate Dahlia too, because she's a brilliant wordsmith. She's a wise and provocative influencer, and I'm just so grateful and excited to be doing this with you. So thank you. And I also want to say, whether you've read this book or not, you should read it. But what I think about this book is that it's kind of like a song of praise. The word came to me as psalm. It's a psalm to hope and inspiration and relentless persistence. And I really hope that you'll take that to heart when you read the book. If you've already read it again. Think about what we're talking about today as being, an affirmation of relentless persistence and resistance. So let's start out about you. Okay, Dahlia, what sparked your interest in social justice? Were you an activist in high school? What passions moved you to the law? Because I have a really hard time imagining a Dahlia Lithwick who was not ever socially and politically aware or involved.
So first of all, thank you, and thank you to the amazing organizers. I know this was like not easy to get me here, and I'm a pain. And one of them said to me last night, this is going to be so awesome for you because it's going to feel like you're in a room with a couple of your best friends. And I was like, good, because then they won't mind that I slept in the clothes that I'm wearing today. But instead of drinking with you at the bar at the hotel, I had to be on MSNBC because that's how my friends experienced me. And as Deena just said, I got into the Supreme Court coverage racket in no small part because you had long, luxurious summers off, and unless a justice died, there was no breaking news until the last 2 weeks of June. It was a pretty sweet gig for someone who wanted to bathe and change their clothes. And those days are over. Now it's just literally, as I have spoken to you in the last minute, Clarence Thomas probably did something else. That's it's just a really different beat from the one I came to. And I just want to say one other thing before I talk about me and social justice, which is just, I've been listening to this whole conference to speakers who are sort of pinging back and forth between sort of almost despair. I mean, that sense that I didn't think things could get worse. And then they got worse, and then I didn't think things could get worse, and now they're worse. And that's very acute, and I think it's important to name that feeling. But then, pinging to this place, I mean, we've heard it all day of, there are extraordinary exemplars of what you do in hard times. And you met a whole bunch of them today, and I'm just honored to be among some of the folks who've spoken today. But I do think that we are we were a little tiny bit spoiled because we didn't live in a reality where soul-crushing, painful sort of failure of democracy was the thing we had to deal with every day for most of my life until 2015-ish. The hardest thing I had to deal with was is Eric Usher going to take me to the prom? And long after I married someone else, it just seemed we lived in a bubble of, privilege. And that's not all of us. A lot of us did not live in that bubble of privilege. And as I think you heard in the last panel, one of the few, for me, bright spots is that now we all get to see, all of us, what it's like to live in existential worry and fear, which many, many people have been living with for decades, if not centuries, in this country. And that leveling, that sense that just because Dobbs didn't affect you, or just because life before Dobbs didn't affect you, or just because life after Dobbs may not affect you, is just not good enough anymore. And so, yes, we're careening back and forth between these two realities, one of which is painful and hard, the other is holy hell. Women have risen to the occasion time and time and time again throughout history, and they are doing it now. And that's kind of amazing. So I just want to say, like, if you are feeling that sort of whiplashy sense of both hope and despair, please know, as they say in, Harvard Law School in 1960, look to your left and look to your right because everyone else is feeling the same thing. Okay. So I don't know how I came to my social justice career. Many years after I became a Supreme Court reporter, somebody who went to middle school with me reminded me that when the boys phys ed teacher at my school in 7th grade hived us off into the people who are going to do football and the people who are going to do touch kickball or something, I was the one who was like, oh, hell no, I'm doing football. I have no memory of this, but apparently this is who I was long before I knew who I was. I will say, and this is maybe the only other sort of semi-serious thing I'm going to say. The Supreme Court beat for 22 of the 23 and a half years I've covered it was a really, not a justice beat. It was a beat about covering an institution that those of us who covered it with way too much reverence, way too much respect, a tendency to say this is an oracular, perfect institution, and what I'm going to do is cover the law. And it's no small accident that those of us who were drawn to covering the Supreme Court are not, by and large, the people who are breaking stories right now. The stories that have been broken in the last 2 years about conduct of the justices that is highly questionable are being broken by either investigative reporters or political reporters. So I just want to be clear that I live in the great sort of personal sadness and shame that I think ours was a beat that worked as hard as the justices did in some instances to mystify the court and to make it seem as though what the justices did was not the business of the public or the press. And, I have noted in my career, I've covered many confirmation hearings, that the people who are sent in to cover Supreme Court confirmation hearings are not Supreme Court reporters. The people who were sent in to cover confirmation hearings are political reporters, because it is a political event. And the day after a justice is sworn, it is not a political event, it is an oracular event, right? It is an event that now you bring in the Supreme Court reporters and we talk about the cases. And into the gulf between those two things is where everything went wrong. And this is me just saying mea culpa, but I don't think of myself as a person who did a really great job on social justice, because for a lot of years, I was just covering doctrine the way you would cover science or sports. And it's taken, I think, a lot of us in the press corps until this moment to realize the degree to which the sort of structural systemic failures of thinking about the court as a purely partisan political institution is as much the fault of those of us who didn't think we were social justice warriors. We thought we were commentators.
Well, that's actually a good segue into another question I wanted to ask you, which is to talk about your decision to leave the press corps, the court press corps. And you write about it in the book. It was around the Kavanaugh confirmation hearings, and particularly about Christine Blasey Ford. And a big theme in the book is about working within the system, and when do you slug it out and stay working in the system because you think, even though you believe that the system is flawed, is a nice way to put it, you can make a difference, or when do you decide to get out? You decided to get out in a big way, in a public way. So talk about that, if you would.
The short version of this story is that I sat through the Kavanaugh hearings. I was in the room. It was a very small Senate room for both Dr. Ford's testimony. It was really extraordinary to be in that room. I don't know that TV conveyed it, but the thing I think I describe in the book is that the women reporters, like everyone's shoulders were up around their ears. It felt very personal, both listening to her testimony and to his. I was in the room hearing, even the Fox News reporters saying, this is over. They're going to withdraw his nomination. And then a few hours later, Judge Kavanaugh, smashing his, binder and shouting and, yelling at the senators, particularly the women senators, and pledging, that we would all reap the consequences. And I left that hearing with a very deep sense of like an early iteration of the thing I just described to you, which is I had just seen an atrocity and that it was being reported as like, more of this sort of he says, she says, what's going to happen? Who knows? And that the actual human cost, particularly to Dr. Ford, who kind of was just left in the dust after the hearings, was not taken into account very much by anyone. And so I found myself, because very quickly thereafter, Judge Kavanaugh became Justice Kavanaugh, and then the press corps, as I said, sweeps in and starts just saying, Justice Kavanaugh asked this excellent question about, as though none of this had happened, as though he'd been like dunked in a vat and brought out, anew, and now he was calling balls and strikes, and that was the end of it. And so I did the thing that I'm ashamed to say, I think I said in the book, for like several months when I was supposed to like take the train and go to the court and cover oral argument, which I had been doing for many years, I would just be like, I have a cold. And this went on first weeks and then months, and I was like, achoo, I don't think I can make it today. I just literally couldn't enter the building. And this was before we had oral arguments online as we do now, so I was just missing arguments and working off transcripts a day later, but not going in to kind of cover the court, and my beat at the court had always been kind of this quirky sports reporting of oral argument, and so there was like a little Dahlia-shaped hole at Slate.com, and at some point a year later, my editor was like, just checking, but you've had a cold for a year. Why are you going into the building? And I just was like, I can't sit there and be Justice Kavanaugh this and Justice, like it feels like we've missed a beat in terms of a reckoning about what happened. And my editor, who was a monster, was like, well, you should write that piece. That would be a cool piece. So I was like, shoot, I have a cold. I did end up writing this piece that essentially said, here is why I can't do the thing that we've been doing, which is covering this as though it's theater, because like somebody was left broken and we don't seem to have much regard for that person, and somebody else has been washed clean and we are treating that person like a monarch. And the funny thing, this is the last thing I'll say about that, the only time since then that I've been back in the court was right before the court closed for COVID. I got the last in-person interview with Justice Ginsburg, which we were able to, if I'd have known it was the last interview, I would have asked really different questions. But I was in the building for that, but I never went to another oral argument. And the very last thing, this is kind of goes to your question about complicity and what we do and how we think about being on the inside or the outside, is that after I filed that piece and published it, I got like reams and reams of emails from friends who were law professors saying, thank you, now I'm not teaching con law anymore. Like you have absolved me of the need to treat the court as though it is a serious entity, so I'm just not, for this exact reason, it's not legitimate, I will not be teaching constitutional law anymore. And I was like, oh my God, no, like the lesson is not that you don't like teach your students. The lesson is we all have to figure out for ourselves these questions about how much you use whatever sort of platform and privilege you have to like lift up institutions and make them seem more perfect, and how much you can take before you have to sort of step out and say, I can't be a part of this. And it's really a hard question for me. I after Dobbs came down in June, I had another huge raft of friends who teach constitutional law who are like, I'm done, can't teach. There's no doctrine. There's no doctrine about guns. There's no doctrine about Chevron. There's no doctrine about anything. I can't teach. And I was like, no, you teach, like figure out a way to do it. But I think this question of how we exist within institutions that exist to do violence to a lot of us, the weakest among us, is in some sense, I mean, for me, it was the existential question of the Trump era and continues to be, I think, the existential question of this moment.
Well, I had the feeling that during that period, maybe the book started to take shape in your mind, and I wanted to ask you to tell us about that. So both about how the book took shape in your mind, and then more specifically, did you start with the particular stories, the particular women, or the issues? And there's 3 chapters on voting rights. There's 2 chapters that have to do with sexual assault and political power. And by the way, I want to really appreciate your writing your personal story in the book. It's powerful, and it's important that you do that. And then 2, I think, concern immigrants and reproductive rights. And by the way, if you haven't read the book, there's a chapter in it about Bridget Amiri, who is a graduate of the UC and was here, I guess, last fall. But people should really read it. She's the litigator on the border who did the Garza case. Anyway, how the book took shape and how you conceived it.
So I think you're quickly going to learn that I am like Justice Breyer. Everything has like 3 thoughts going on at the same time. So you just have to follow me on all of my journeys. I think there's sort of 3 strands. One was that I was just a reporter and I was covering these cases in real time. And so every case that I talk about in the book is something that I covered at the time and thought was interesting. So there's a little bit of that. I was really obsessed with this issue. I feel like this is the issue that's been bubbling underneath a lot of the panels today. From the day I started covering the court in 1999, I'm old. From the day I started covering the court, I was really obsessed with the question of whether there is, in fact, some kind of special, unique relationship between women and the law. And I was obsessed with it in part because for many years I was covering a Supreme Court that had 1-1 Justice O'Connor, 1-1 Justice Ginsburg, and it was kind of a natural experiment in this question of, is there something unique about the way women approach law? And in some sense, it was interesting to have the 2 of them. I missed the years when it was just O'Connor, and people would write these, really interesting law review articles about how Justice O'Connor had this singular feminine approach to the rule of law, and it was, relational, and it was sort of trying to fix things and problem solve, and that, men had a more sort of crisp, rule-oriented way of thinking about the rule of law, and women had a much more let's fix things. And there was a big kind of theory that that's how women approach the law. And then, of course, Justice Ginsburg comes on the court and she's completely rule-oriented and completely, doctrine-oriented. And all those studies were like, that's got to be wrong. I was very interested in, and I'll just give you the statistic, years later when they look at these meta-studies, Justice Ginsburg and O'Connor over the course of their careers, unsurprisingly, for somebody appointed by a Democrat and a Republican, agree about 50% of the time. Not surprising. On gender cases that inflect on harassment, pregnancy, pay discrimination, 90% agreement rate, right? Fascinating. So this question has animated my whole career in some sense. Is there something that women either look for in the law or find in the law that they can't find when they're doing regular politics? And so for me, the thing that really sparked a match and made me sort of want to write this book was when the airports were filled in the first week after the inauguration and the travel ban comes down, the Muslim ban. And suddenly, everyone is standing at Logan or at Dulles or at JFK holding up a sign, and they're tax attorneys and they do probate. They don't actually know immigration law, but they're holding up signs that are in Pushtu in Arabic saying I'm your lawyer, I'm here for you. And unbelievably, very early on, it was clear overwhelmingly women to men that women were showing up. 4 of the 5 judges that enjoined the travel ban in the first 48 hours, women. So right from the minute, I mean, really right from the Women's March, what was interesting to me as a question is, like, what are women seeing and doing that make them say, I'm going to pick up the levers of the law and fix this. And I'm not going to wait for some other legal solution that doesn't come from me, right? This was, again, the panel you just heard. And I kept seeing it over and over and over again. So whether it was Bridget's case, whether it was, Becca Heller, whether it was, the book starts with Sally Yates refusing to enforce the travel ban, put the imprimatur of DOJ on it. What I just kept seeing was women describing something that had been invisible to me, which is like, no, I actually do have a kind of special relationship with the law and the rule of law. And so I'm going to use it. And so that was what really, for me, birthed the book, was this kind of question of, what is it like, and maybe this dovetails with where we started on, like, living on the seam between despair and hope. But for me, most of the women in the book really lived on the line, like the really thin line between believing that law is the thing that gives us dignity and justice and equality and rights and freedom. It gave our grandmothers credit cards, it's right, it's a good thing. And also, oh, the law is the thing that can turn on a dime and put you in jail for having a miscarriage. We all didn't know it was that fine, but the people that I interviewed all seemed to know that sort of in their bones. And so that was the line I just wanted to pull and pull and pull and figure out where that came from and what it meant. And also, I think I mostly just wanted to sort of lift it up, because it seemed to me, and this is, I will finish here, but we were talking this morning about the women in Iran who are on the streets protesting, right? What they don't have is the thing we have, which is the access to this incredible machinery that says, as long as you can blue book and have a yellow pad and have a law license, you can, like, change the world. That's really different from hoping that the clerics change their mind about you. It's really a huge power, and we've been a little bit asleep about using it. And so what these women said to me in different sort of formations throughout interviews, years of interviews in the book, was some version of, I didn't kind of know I had this superpower, and then I did, and then I won. And just the coda to all that is that every woman that I profile in the book, and I just want to be super clear, these are not like the 10 greatest lawyers. These were not, some of them are among you, like they are avatars for other people. But every one of the women in the book, when the book was published, wrote me a note saying, like, Dear Dahlia, awesome book, super honored to be in it. I'm the one person who doesn't belong. Sally Yates wrote that. So I'm just like thinking, this is this funny, paradoxical world we live in, where we like have a superpower and we're like, oh, what's that cape I keep tripping on? And so that's really was the genesis of it, was both to sort of celebrate those women, but also to tell young women who don't fully know why they should be going to law school that, in fact, like, if you get a blue book and a license and a yellow pad, you could change the world.
As I was thinking about it. Well, I just want to highlight a couple of the themes of the book to draw all of that out a little further. One of the themes of the book, and I'm drawing on these from actually, well, some of them are quotes from people, and some of them are Dahlia's, the way Dahlia writes about it. But I think this one is from Becca Heller, who said, constitutional democracy is not a spectator sport. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's a very, very important point to me, especially when you think about atrocity prevention and being a bystander or an upstander, and is there anything in between? But anyway, the theme is that enduring power lies in the people who step into the fight, and they don't have to be famous, or they don't have to become famous. Another really important theme in the book is organizing. Is that large-scale mobilization is the key, it is the key, not a key, to social and legal change. And there's a false dichotomy. This is a personal credo of my life. There's really a false dichotomy between activism and legal practice. And that's one of the things I really love about your book, because they're all activists. And then finally, the theme of this conference is the theme of your book, which is that women's rights are human rights. And I like the way, I think this was a quote from Anita Hill, that women have a split screen understanding. That we do understand that the legal system is set up to privilege, privilege men and has privileged women too, but has still been inaccessible for so many people for so long. And at the same time, we still have to show up and keep showing up. And I love Shirley Chisholm's line. Shirley Chisholm was a presidential candidate way back in the day. I'm old too, in the 70s. She said, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. I love that, and I think that's a big part of what you're saying. So the book what you do in the book is talk about who is visible, who does the work, who is seen and remembered, and it doesn't have to be sheroes. It doesn't have to be people we know. And you say that the book is about surfacing justice, and I love that. I think that's a really powerful and beautiful idea. So will you talk a little bit about what that means?
I think, the other thing that was at the back of my mind as I was working on this book was that I found myself getting very, very nervous that several generations of women that I knew were substituting buying an RBG mug for doing justice work. And you really, I have to say, in all candor, you really saw it on days when reproductive rights court cases were being argued at the courts, that it felt like it was a flea market, that everybody was buying lots of T-shirts and hats, and that's good. I'm not saying it's not good, but we were substituting not just sort of buying for understanding, but also having this sense that RBG was just going to fix everything for us. And that for a very long time, we thought that, she somehow was in charge of everything and we could just do other stuff. And that was such a worry to me, both because I think it's part of why a lot of people who should have known better didn't show up in the 2016 election when there was one vacancy and 3 octogenarians on the Supreme Court. And, Mitch McConnell was not only holding a seat open, but, people were running, right? John McCain was overtly running on the promise, as was Ted Cruz, that if Hillary Clinton wins in 2016, we will hold this seat open for 4 more years or 8 more years. And we didn't rank it in our top 10 issues. We were just oh, the court's fine because RBG's there. And by the way, the flip of this is the people who want to say everything that's gone wrong is because of RBG. That's the other side of the same coin, right? She's going to fix everything. She screwed us. Neither of those two things are, in fact, completely true. What's true is that we didn't understand what has been happening in this country for 50 years in terms of not just women's rights, not just rights of LGBTQ Americans, not just rights of immigrants and vulnerable communities, but democracy itself, which is the thing that the last panel was, that democracy itself was being warped and distorted. And we were it's cool, RBG's got this. And so I needed to write a book that was very much a kind of corrective to the idea that the women who do justice in this country do that by fan fiction, right? That we just watch these 9 women fix everything. And so I very much wanted to sort of find people who, in my head, I always said they were Ruth Baby Ginsburg's, they were just, that people everywhere among us have exactly the skill set she had, exactly the, kind of creativity and determination to do what she did. And the idea that we sort of seeded the field for that kind of creativity and imagination to folks on the other side who are going to like suppress rights and freedoms just struck me as like a very big original sin that we were committing. And so I wanted to find people who very much had that sense that there's no grown-ups in the room. I guess I'm the grown-up now. And they were there. And they really like were, I mean, they are, as I said, everywhere. They're in this room. And I think that for me, it's the reason the book starts with Pauli Murray, because I'm completely obsessed with Pauli Murray. And RBG, by the way, was totally obsessed with Pauli Murray. And don't be embarrassed if you've never heard of Pauli Murray, because I somehow got through 3 years of law school without ever reading anything about Pauli Murray. But Pauli Murray was a person who history has almost entirely papered over. Every law school in the country should have a Pauli Murray building. And the fact that, Pauli Murray was gender nonconforming before there was a name for that Pauli Murray was Black, that Pauli Murray didn't have any of the privileges that RBG had, doesn't change the fact that Pauli Murray's law school paper for Howard Law School, which people laughed at, became the spine of Brown v. Board. It was literally the idea of what Pauli Murray was doing, which was laughed at in class, becomes LDF's Brown v. Board brief, and Pauli Murray's name is nowhere on it. And so the reason I am obsessed with this is it's exactly your question, Deena, which is this is how women and people of color have been organizing in this country around the law forever, which is there isn't some savior. It's ground up. It's huge groups of people. It's nobody trying to get famous. It's people just making change, using what little power there is. And that is fundamentally service work. And it sucks that it's service work. It's remunerated as service work. It is often disregarded by history as service work. But what I wanted to say is, and what I really have heard so many times today from so many people, is that this is in fact how change has always happened, and it is how change will continue to happen. And the fact that there's a chapter in the book about gerrymandering reform, nobody is ever going to make a Netflix movie about reapportionment. But it was really, I know
You can make one.
Anyone can do it. But I really think that this is the thing, like every single thing that you heard earlier today is going to require massive structural democracy reform. It is not necessarily easy or glamorous, and no one's going to make a movie about it. But that's how change happens. It's how change is going to keep happening. And what I wanted the book to do was say, like, instead of buying one more tote bag and thinking that, Kamala Harris is going to fix it, or Jack Smith is going to fix it, or, we keep thinking some other grown-up is going to come in and prop up democracy. Like, it's on us. But the good news is we can do it because we've been doing it for hundreds of years.
Well, let's kind of get into some of the issues then now.
What have we been doing?
Let's talk about. I want to say that to me, and I think to all of us, we have a really serious rule of law problem in this country. You talked about being, there's an existential threat to democracy, and we're kind of thinking about wearing pink hats. It's like the thing about don't get a mug. But the question, what is rule of law? Rule of law is having faith and trust that the system of government has your back, will remedy an injustice, is there to be changed where it's needed, and or it's possible to change, and then it's about accountability. And I'm feeling very despondent about all of this, right? So let's go to the really cheerful thing of the court. Let's talk about the court, okay? Because I mean, it's like a fire hose of crap. It's just every single day there's another story. It was kind of like with Trump. Every single day there's something else, and I keep thinking, this will get him. people are going to stop, and it just keeps going. And now it's not just Clarence Thomas, but it's Gorsuch, and it's. So I just want to ask you it enrages me. It's unraveling around us and around what's happening to women. The court is, and I want to know what can we do? What kind of ethical rules are really possible that could be binding? How in the world could they be monitored? There's a discussion about it being within the court. That's silly. That's totally ridiculous. What about court packing? What about term limits? What about impeachment? Anyway, you get what I'm trying to say. I just want to sort of throw it out and see what you can talk about. And are we stuck with ideologues like Asmerick?
So as you're talking, it occurs to me, what I'm about to say, I don't think I've thought before until you said what you said, so this is going to be the most provocative thing I say. But I think that we may have accidentally thrown off British tyrannical monarchic rule in order to create the tyrannical monarchic rule of the Supreme Court in this country. And I'm not entirely kidding. I think that, both by design, I think the framers quite deliberately created a court where it was almost impossible to remove somebody. And I think that was by design. I think they believed in tandem with that justices would behave better. That's hilarious. But I really do think that a lot of us find ourselves in this moment saying, and I really felt it after Dobbs, oh, well, we're just stuck with this. Too bad, so sad. We live under the dead hand of Donald Trump's 3 justices for the rest of our days and hope that our great-grandchildren do better. That was really the vibe, that there's nothing to be done. And even if you watch the hearings this week, the Judiciary Committee hearings, the sort of asymmetry between the purposive conversation about what one wants the court to be is really alarming. Right or not, Mike Lee and Ted Cruz and Senator John Kennedy have a really good, coherent statement of what they think rule of law means and an independent judiciary means and what they think the court should do. And we're just very bad at this. We are very bad at making the case for what the court should be doing. And we're very, very enthralled to the idea that we're just stuck. We're stuck, and it's terrible. And so one of the things, and it's probably the only good thing about the sort of drip of information about the court, is that I've seen in my career a huge uptick in actual interest in maybe I'm not stuck with this. Maybe there are things we can do. And that's changed. The polling shows it's certainly changed even in the last couple of months. And it has very, very demonstrably changed. Somebody said this morning, since Dobbs. Dobbs and Bruin, which was the gun case last year, and probably the EPA case too, I think single-handedly did the work that some of us have been doing for years of connecting judicial outcomes with broken democracy and minority rule. And you can't understand what it is to live in a system that is working precisely as it was designed, right? Where you have presidents who lose the popular vote, choosing a justice who is then ratified by a minority-majority rule Senate, right? In which tens and thousands more people are represented in Montana and West Virginia than in California and Massachusetts. So you've got a minority-majority president picking a minority-majority candidate, ratified by a minority-majority Senate. Oh, and then they vote to do away with voting, right? So then you get a court that is Citizens United, Shelby County, Rucho, Brnovich, right? A whole line of cases that, as you heard earlier today, make it impossible for majorities to effectuate their will at the polling place. That's why Justice Alito's line in Dobbs, if you don't like it, vote it out, is just straight up trolling, because he has single-handedly been one of the architects of making it really hard to vote it out. So good, now we get it. It took a very long time, but as you heard earlier, I think people who looked around and said, how can you have 75% majorities in this country wanting background checks, wanting at least some access to reproductive freedom, wanting at least some regulation of climate, and a court that's like, yeah, no. Well, that's why, because it was built that way. So I think that one of the lessons we have to take, and that we have taken, I think, in the last year, is that if we don't want a minority rule system, a tyrannical minority rule system that perpetuates itself structurally, then we have to fix those systems. And what I've seen this year that's very heartening is reform to the Electoral Count Act, right? That seems like, what now? I know, I watched all of your faces go on screen save. Oh my God, she's talking about reforming the Electoral Count Act. But like, this is a way of correcting for minority tyranny. And reform of, the states that are trying to figure out how to do gerrymandering reform, redistricting reform, people understand. And now we're just in a foot race, right? We are in a foot race between forces that want to suppress voting and people who now really do, I think, viscerally feel what happens if populations want to express their will at the ballot box and then have their votes thrown out. And that's what Morby Harper is. So I think that people connecting both the misconduct at the court that you're describing, but also doctrinal efforts to subvert democracy was a really long time coming. Like, we've been asleep at the switch on this for several decades. And what I think is, as much as it's confusing, and it is confusing, I think, for the public to understand what democracy suppression looks like, the fact that January 6th keeps losing, right, including yesterday, with all of those convictions of those at the ballot box in the midterms. That was like, cue the harps. There you go. You wanted hope? There's the harps. The fact that democracy and election denialists lost in the midterms, in many cases, if not most. And the fact that folks are really starting to understand that if they want to be able to vote for outcomes either on the state or local level or on the federal level that matter to them, then the court is not only the instrument of impeding the vote, but that the misconduct is a result of the immunity we have afforded them. We have told them they are gods and monarchs. We have, and I hear again, I cop to it, those of us in the press have colluded in that myth-making. And what I think is really helpful is we are now able, again, it's very late, we're at like 57 seconds on the doomsday clock, but we are having, I think, a meaningful conversation about structural reform. So my very quick answer on jurisdiction stripping, court backing, term limits, all of the different proposals to fix the court, my answer is yes, all of them, tomorrow.
You really think structural reform is going to happen in our lifetime? I mean, what are we talking about?
I think that I think it is a completely non-trivial win that there's an ethics bill that was put forward by Angus King and Susan Collins last week. We have not seen a bipartisan, much less, a Republican and an independent, put forth a bill to cabin the court's authority to completely determine its own ethics rules. I know it's tiny, but it's not nothing. And I also think that we now have 4 bills that we didn't have, a couple of years ago, to start to think about adding seats to the court, or to start to think about, 18-year terms and every president getting to seat 2 justices. Like, I think these things don't happen quickly, but I think that the idea that we can't do anything is the reason that elected officials don't try to do anything. And so this is going to have to come from a massive public will that says, and by the way, and we didn't talk about this, I think, nearly enough in the last panel, but if you were depressed last June, holy cow, affirmative action, gerrymandering, 303 Creative is just barreling down at us. The Indian Child Welfare Act, none of these cases are going to go well. And so we're going to have another punch in the face in June, where in addition to Harlan Crow, somebody made the joke on Twitter today, we're going to find out tomorrow that Clarence Thomas and Ginny Thomas are on Harlan Crow's like long distance plan, like right? That he's paying for their like parking fees. But in addition to all of that, we're also going to have like huge doctrinal shift, and so I think that insofar as there can be any kind of silver lining to the shenanigans at the court, it's that people are waking up to the fact that if the choice is between being like enthralled to a court because we're just stuck with it, or holy cow, this is a democracy. The nature of checks and balances is that in fact the other two branches have an obligation and an affirmative duty to check the court. That Congress has been, by the way, Steve Vladeck is amazing on this, setting limits on and expanding not just the number of seats in the court, but like pay for the court. They forced the poor justices, Congress forced the poor justices to ride circuit for years. You think the justices like that? They like slept in hay. It was terrible, but Congress has massive power to regulate the court. So the sort of decision to take the decision that Congress can do nothing and therefore we can force Congress to do nothing is just two layers of learned helplessness that I am imploring people to put down right now.
I think that's really important. I wanted to pivot a bit to the Equal Rights Amendment, to the ERA. Ambassador Verveer this morning brought it up, and I was really happy. How many of you pay any attention to the ERA? That's good. Hey! I mean, for me, the ERA kind of is the history with Phyllis Schlafly, which is, isn't she dead? Is she dead?
Yes.
I'm sorry, that's really bad. But I mean, the point is that I've always thought that the ERA was just something that would be a really nice idea. But after Dobbs, it's kind of a human rights issue, isn't it? It's certainly a democracy issue. And if I can sort of wax, I mean, I was very happy that she brought it up. I happen to have been at a panel this past week at the American Bar Association's International Law section on the ERA and how it's a human rights issue. And it kind of lit a fire under me because, like I said, I haven't paid much attention to it. But kind of how is it that we're talking about the Comstock Act, 150-year-old anti-vice bill, and we still don't have equal rights for women? And Ambassador Verveer pointed out that there's 6 countries in the world, we're one of them, 187 countries of 193 have ratified the Women's Convention, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. What's the opposition here? I mean, what's wrong, right? And so last week, and she mentioned this, but last week, so I don't know, do people, maybe I should just say a word about what the ERA is. It's so simple. Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex, and Congress shall have the power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article. So, the ERA was introduced in 1923. It was brought to the floor in 1972. It was approved in the Senate, and then it was submitted to state legislatures for ratification within 7 years. And this is Ambassador Verveer talked about just the deadline. Well, this is what came up last week. So within 1 year, a majority of states had ratified the ERA. 30 states had, but we need 3/4 to ratify a constitutional amendment. So they did extend the deadline to 1982, which was another 2 years, I guess. But it wasn't ratified by the requisite 3/4 majority until Virginia became the 38th state. I say that because I'm from Virginia. In 2020. Yes, 2020. So what? People think, well, it's too late. The deadline is passed. But what's going on in the Senate is, well, let's just rescind the deadline. Let's just have legislation that rescinds the deadline, and then we have this amendment that is so important. Well, the vote was there were 51, they needed 60 votes in the Senate, I guess, to get this, to pass this as law, to rescind the legislation. 51 votes. It failed by 9 votes. Among those 51 votes were Lisa Murkowski of Alaska and Susan Collins of Maine, 2 Republicans who haven't always been on the best side of these issues. So that's important. And I think the question for us is, so who else, what other women are in the Senate that are within those 9 votes that need to be spoken to and need to be lobbied? And it's done for this term, but not for next term. Let's keep thinking about this. Let's keep lobbying. The ERA is really a human rights issue. And so, by the way, is CEDAW. We really, if 187 countries in the world have equal rights for women, like I said, what's the opposition? So, I'm a human rights lawyer. Anyway, where was I going with that? Just my rant.
Can I say one quick
Yeah,
thing?
please do.
I mean, I put this in the bucket of tools we have that we don't know we have and therefore don't use, or that we think they're like, like the VCR, of the law, like it's something, that has passed, and so we want to invent a new thing, but VCRs are still pretty good, I'd rather have one than have no rights. So it just seems to me that, I put this amidst the many, many things that we could, with the blue book and yellow pad, pick up and do, and I put it in the bucket of things that we've slightly neglected. But just one tiny beat on this, if I may, and Deena's heard this rant from me, and I think maybe some of you have heard this rant from me, but when Justice Jackson was going through her confirmation hearings, oh my God, it feels like 700 years ago. One of the things that was very dismaying to me, in addition to the flagrant disrespect for the most qualified person ever to be nominated to the Supreme Court in my lifetime, but one of the other things that was dismaying was this conversation about substantive due process and what is it, and blah, 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 and what can I do about the fact that William O. Douglas was smoking pot and invented this out of the penumbra? And there was no defense, not just from Justice Jackson, who was not her job to defend substantive due process, but not from anyone on the Dem side of the Judiciary Committee. And this a little bit goes to your point from earlier today, and a little bit to the point about the history we leave behind. Substantive due process is actually an incredibly powerful, beautiful machine that was put into place by the radical abolitionists who write the Reconstruction Amendment. It's not got nothing to do with women and their bodies and their ability, under the sort of heading of reproductive justice, to decide whether or not to have children. It was emphatically something that was put into place because formerly enslaved people could not decide who they married. Their marriage was not lawful. Their children were not their property. Their children and spouses were taken away from them and used for economic production. And if you read Peggy Cooper Davis, who I'm obsessed with, and if you read Dorothy Roberts, who I'm obsessed with, and if you read Michelle Goodwin, you will find out that, in fact, the right to say, I will marry this person, I will not marry that person, these are my children, I will raise them as I see fit, and they will live with me, and no, you cannot use my body for forced pregnancy, are all baked into the Reconstruction Amendments. The idea that your body could be used by the state for forced pregnancy against your will, baked into the Reconstruction Amendments. So in addition to not learning about Pauli Murray in law school, I was taught that substantive due process was because William O. Douglas got super high and invented it in Griswold. And I just want to say that in the sort of bucket of rights that we have given away, and this really does go to what you heard about LGBTQ rights under the Constitution. The bucket of rights we have given away includes the most powerful story about what the Reconstruction Amendments were trying to put into the Constitution that were not there before. And so if anyone tells you that substantive due process does not have force and meaning, it has all the force and meaning. We have chosen not to tell that story. We have chosen not to stand up for the proposition that that is exactly the thing that the drafters were trying to give us. And I hear it never from our leadership. So I want to put it in the sort of pile of things that we could use and deploy with storytelling, and which, by the way, Black women scholars have been telling us for years to use and deploy, and we don't teach it in school. And I really, really think that to seed that ground, to just say that everything that the Warren Court gave us was like sort of like made up rights that had no footing in doctrine, is just to seed unbelievable, not just rhetorical and narrative power, but substantial legal power that we gave away.
And I just wanted to share a quote apropos of all of that from Frederick Douglass in 1866, where he said, "There is no general assertion of human rights that can be of any practical value while there remains such an idea as the right of each state to control its own affairs." And that's really where we're headed, right? When I say we're almost out of time, it just means I'm wanting to let you all have some time. But I do want to just maybe ask just one more, or explore one more point about how you build power at the state and local level for the kinds of changes that you want to see at the federal level. And that's a lot of what is in your book, but I think we can talk more about that in terms of accountability and in terms of organizing, and in terms of what women need to do.
I mean, look, we're seeing, again, the other side is really, really good at taking over election boards, at saying that one parent, one disgruntled parent can not only get a book banned in a classroom, but can also get a teacher disciplined for teaching something, right? Like, we are seeing what it is like to take over state and local power. And we, again, I put this slightly in the, sort of, oh, but I love RBG and Kamala's so pretty, like bucket of, we get so hyper-focused on, every 4-year elections and on, candidates we love and candidates we hate, like it's the Kardashians. And we can't do politics that way. We have to understand that we need to be on our election boards. We need to be, as you heard, helping monitor elections, which, by the way, used to be fun and is not fun anymore. I mean, it is really scary to be on a school board right now. It is really scary to be an elections worker right now. And we are living in a moment with a massive uptick in vigilantism in this country. And that is essentially giving license to people to determine for themselves what the law is. So we have to do better at, state attorney generals races. We have to do better, as you heard earlier, on state Supreme Court races. Every one of those things is existential. And what it means is, again, that seems really depressing, but it means it's doable. And we know how to do it. We just have to kind of focus up and understand that, particularly when we live in a moment of an imperial, unaccountable Supreme Court, that the wins are going to happen at the state and city and local county levels. And that's kind of sad for those of us who, thought we lived in a different universe. But it's also a real PowerPoint. It means that we can claw back that which seems like it's taken away. And I think, again, of all these women, I mean, we heard about them this morning. I was doing a briefing a few weeks ago for women in Ohio who are getting reproductive freedom on the ballot. These are not people who have ever done door-to-door canvassing. They are not people who are super comfortable sitting on the sidewalk outside of Target talking about reproductive rights. They are not okay. And they're doing it. And that's how it's going to happen. And I really think it kind of slightly goes back to my airport revolution point. I think that because we remember in our bones what it is like. I mean, I had chills today hearing about Afghanistan. And like, you're done with school in 6th grade. My great-grandmother was married at 12. That was understood. So like, I don't want to go back to that. I know what that feels like. So we have both the power, and that's what I really want to emphasize. Like, my great-grandmother didn't have a say in it. It was a transfer of property. We do. And so I think what I see is people who are really, really, really understanding that if the school board is going to be full of nutters, like, this nutter needs to be on it too. And like, we're seeing that, and we're really, like, if you think about it, as shocking as it is how quickly the wheels came off, it is equally possible to put the wheels back on. And we're seeing that, and that's why, you know, every one of those ballot initiatives on reproductive rights went the way they did. That's why kids were standing in line in Wisconsin to vote in a state Supreme Court race for hours. I mean, this is, we are not having to invent tracks that are not already there. We just have to get in the train and like start pumping the little thing, you know, like the road runner.
I want to open it up and whoops. I want to open it up and let people ask questions or make comments. And then I'll reserve a minute or two to ask another question at the end. Yeah, Julianne.
I have a question about the tracks. Well, I can stand up a little bit.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, you were just talking about we have the tracks in place. We just need to get on the train and do it. What role do you think education plays in that? Because a lot of our kids growing up in this school system are not learning the right things about civics, about the Supreme Court, about how our country works, and they are not empowered, let's put it this way, yet, to know that they can do the right thing. And I think we somehow have an obligation to help that next generation really to understand it better. But I'm just asking, like, have you done any work with, you know, school-age kids about these types of topics? And shouldn't we all be doing that type of work?
Yeah, I mean, I think, listen, when Justice O'Connor stepped down from the court, the first thing she undertook, 2 things: judicial elections, which she knew long before it was cool to say that judicial elections are going to kill democracy. She was saying it a very long time before, and managed to move the needle 0 on getting states to adopt what she would have put in their place. And the other thing was civics education. I mean, she knew that, you know, if we did not, she would always say, like, people can name, like, all of the judges on Dancing with the Stars and none of the justices on the Supreme Court. And it's worse now. And now we're, like, you know, careening into the headwinds of, you know, school districts that are saying you can't teach critical race theory and you can't, you know, read books and you can't say anything, you know, bad that'll make a kid feel bad about themselves. So, like, again, it's happening quickly. I you know, do think that that's been massive overreach in the schools, that the book bans and the, you know, don't say gay and all of the sort of long arm of Ron DeSantis's presidential ambitions is going to fail, much as I think attacking Mickey Mouse is going to fail. But I think, I mean, we have a problem with education, and I don't deny it. I will say one thing, and it dovetails with what some of the earlier panels said about the young people, because that's for 100% for me where I put my hope. And one of the things that I've seen about the sort of generation, you know, my kids' age, is that they're not joiners. They don't join organizations. They're not political in the way we define political, but they show up. And they were showing up, you know, at the polling places in November. They, you know, it's so funny when the pollsters got the midterms completely wrong. I was just cracking up because I was like, you know, they are calling my kid's landline. My kid, I mean, I don't have a landline. My kid doesn't know what one is. So the idea that the pollsters just failed to capture, like, all the millennials and all the Gen Zs is just so emblematic of how our politics, and somebody said this, I think earlier today, our politics is oriented completely in the wrong direction. And so the work is now to say there is a generation coming up that is by far more generous, by far more accepting and tolerant, that is much, much more capacious in its imagination about what we can do around climate change, what we can do around reproductive rights. Like, they have it, and we are not including them. And so what I want to say is, yes, we have a catastrophe around education, and by the way, a Supreme Court that is working very hard to make public school a thing of the past. Like, we should just call that what it is, which is programmatically, like, we're going to push money to religious charter schools, and we are going to defund public schools until they don't exist, and that's one of the reasons we're hounding teachers out of jobs. All of this is problematic. But I also want to say these Gen Zs are smarter, better, kinder people than I ever was or will be, and we have to figure out, absent like doing it sort of structurally through education, how to harness just the fundamental sense of purposiveness, and fundamental sense of optimism that so many of them have that we just ignore.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about what you said earlier about teaching. Okay. Teaching the nuance in, you know, when you were talking about the substantive due process, and I was wondering. Recently someone put out on social media, they were like, I can't believe women fought for the right to work. And it was supposed to be this like tongue-in-cheek thing. And a Black woman put out that there was an actual notice that said it's important that Negro women work because we have to make sure that they're always occupied. And I wondered, what work do you think we all need to do in explaining that, yes, we all want to talk about, you know, advancing, you know, the ERA and advancing women's rights and human rights, but just thinking about how the different perspective is depending on what your what forms of oppression you've either experienced or what communities you come from.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's exactly why I'm obsessed with telling sort of the correct story about the Reconstruction Amendments, because I think that the sort of white law school version of what the 14th Amendment both did and still does is so impoverished. Again, you know, my sense is, and I, you know, say this as somebody who is friends with Michelle Goodwin and Dorothy Roberts, like, I think that the sea change has been that folks are listening to them after Dobbs. I think Catherine Franke, who was in the video this morning, you know, came on my podcast the week after Dobbs, and she just said essentially the thing you said this morning, which is, if you think that Roe was keeping women safe in this country, you were never a pregnant person in Mississippi who was Black. You were never an immigrant seeking. So I think that it's everything you said sort of this morning about, you know, working together and listening. But I think it's also like there is some utility in saying that this story that we like to tell about like how it was good for everybody erased all the people that it was terrible for always. And I think that at least my sense of it is, and I say this as a media person and not a scholar, that the receptivity that I am hearing post-Dobbs to someone like Dorothy Roberts, who's been writing for decades, if you think this stops at abortion, like, you don't understand, this is Michelle Goodwin's book too about policing the womb, you don't understand what it's like when the state comes and takes your children away because you're poor and Black. And so I think that the idea that both, and this was, I think, your point about Planned Parenthood too, that the sort of organizing strata just fully committed to the idea that Roe was the be-all and end-all, and that losing Roe was the be-all and end-all, I think that cratered. My sense of it is that cratered. And it's why I think you're starting to hear the kinds of conversations about, like, maybe give to an abortion fund, right? Like, maybe, you know, it's not good enough to tell the story about how Roe was the end. Roe was the end for some people. It was never the beginning, you know, or Dobbs was the end. And so my sense is that, and it a little bit goes to what we heard this morning, I think in response to a similar question about the zero-sum nature of how we fight back. And I think I want to say one more thing about that. I'm going to say one more thing about that. It's totally orthogonal, but I think it's going to make some sense. I loved the story about how, men in Sweden weren't taking their paternity leave because they didn't want to hamper their careers, and then they realized oh crap, I love my kid. It's fun to I am very obsessed with a thing that Justice Ginsburg did that she doesn't get credit for. We tell a story of Justice Ginsburg. This is really going to make sense in a minute. We tell a story that Justice Ginsburg was this complete ninja, because all of her work at the ACLU Women's Rights Project was trying to make white women, visible to white male judges, right? And so her trick, right, the sort of party trick, was that she would find the white male dad who wanted to stay home with his orphaned kid but couldn't get benefits, or who wanted to take care of his ailing mom but couldn't get benefits, right? She found these really sympathetic male plaintiffs and brought cases on behalf of them. And these male judges who always thought, we're just taking care of women by not letting them do anything outside the home, suddenly had to confront the fact that when a guy wants to be married to somebody who's, the income earner, or a guy wants to take care of their ailing mom, suddenly that's a three-dimensional person, right? And that they have solicitude for that. And Justice Ginsburg actually wasn't doing a party trick. She stayed in touch with those guys her whole life. Those men who were her plaintiffs, she loved them, because the story that she told herself, that she forgot sometimes to tell us, was that she was building Sweden. She was literally building Sweden. That's what she was thinking about. But she was trying to build a world in which fathers could have the sort of multi-layered, complicated, nuanced, emotional, caregiving life that mothers had. She wasn't holding men down. She really did think that if she could create a world where men who wanted to stay home and care for their children, or cook the way her husband did, or helped kids with their homework, could have as fully realized lives as women did. And I hate the fact that we kind of keep telling the narrative of she was tricking the male judges into thinking that women were people too. She really wasn't. She was trying to build this complete world in which all of us got lifted up. And I say it only because, we're in this moment of zero-sumness. And every case, I think, that matters at the US Supreme Court this term is rooted in a theory of scarcity, a myth of scarcity, right? White people need to be able to adopt Native children, so the tribe can't, under ICWA, get the right to raise Native children, right? Affirmative action, my kid deserves to be at Harvard, and that means your kid can't be there. Merrill, the voting rights case, if we draw the districts in a way that are fair, then your vote cancels out my vote. Every single important case at the court this term is rooted in the myth of scarcity, that if you get stuff, I don't. And I really want to retell the story of RBG in the light of what you heard today about the men in India and the fathers in Sweden, which is actually, if we stopped zero-summing, if we stopped thinking that anytime anybody else gets anything, we lose, we could actually really, really do well. And we did well, right? That was sort of the nature, at least the dream of whatever the New Deal was supposed to be about. So I think that one of the mistakes we are making over and over and over again is answering the myth of scarcity with more scarcity. Instead of saying, let's answer the myth of scarcity by exploding it as a myth that this is an incredibly rich, gorgeous, luscious democracy in which, we could all be Marty Ginsburg. And maybe we should sort of strive for that, rather than thinking that every single success that anyone's kid has in this country takes away from mine.
stand up?
Yes, sorry. This has been enlightening and inspirational, and I know we've talked a lot about all the things we can do out there. I'm curious about our profession and the role of women in our profession, because I would guess that many of us had to code switch as women, as people of color, to be able to function and thrive and survive in the practice of law. So I would love to hear from you hope and frankly strategy, so we're not always reacting and we actually are strategizing proactively.
Now let's add to that, this is the action steps question, right? Let's go out here with.
I mean, I really think that, I wrote a book about it, which is a love letter to our profession. I think our profession, and particularly women in our profession, have been really good at stepping up. I think sometimes we want someone to tell us what to do. So I think one thing is we have to be, better at telling kind of ourselves what to do and looking around and finding, you have it here, right? Networks of people. Like every single person in this room should go up to someone who inspired them today and say, what do I do? There are so many people in this room who know. And I think that we just can't wait for, Joe Biden or, I'm trying to think of a TikTok influencer, but I don't, to tell us. But I think, more urgently, the stuff that I have been trying to allude to, and certainly the stuff the panel this morning alluded to, which is really truly the idea that I think we have this notion that if we vote every 4 years, this gets fixed, is a thing of the past. It was never true, and it's emphatically not true now. And so what I want to say is, in addition to, fighting on reproductive rights, fighting on LGBTQ rights, making sure that we are fighting book bans and making sure that we are fighting for the environment and for unions, which, by the way, did you ever think unions would be cool again? WGA. I think we have to understand that it's the big structural stuff. It's the completely opaque. Gerrymandering is what? There was a huge redistricting and I missed it. I think that the stuff that really is going to have to change is all of the machinery of minority rule in this country that is having a heyday right now. And I think that even though that sounds abstract, in every single state, there are people working on voter suppression. There are people working on redistricting reform. There are people working on the Electoral Count Act and fixing the Electoral College. And so I want to say, in addition to your issues that you care about, connect it up to sort of what I think of as democracy repair issues. Because I think we just think, like Mark Elias, like Voting Rights Central is fixing voting rights for everybody, or the ACLU is fixing voting rights for everybody. I think this has to be in our bones, that we have to recover democracy, and that isn't like some abstraction in the sky. It is as tangible and concrete as any of the action steps around recycling and, wearing our seatbelts. And I just think that our failure, and here again, I put it on the press, because when I tried to cover Moore v. Harper, which I think is the single most important democracy case, certainly of my lifetime, even like the guy across from me at MSNBC was like, there's no way. No, that really did happen. I do think I put somebody to sleep trying to explain independence. So I think that we have to understand that, and I know this sounds abstract, but it's actually not at all abstract, that the thing that is going to make us lose on all the stuff we care about is the thing that has been invisible to us as voters and as citizens. And there are really good people working on it. I mean, Protect Democracy is working on it. The Brennan Center is working on it. I mean, people are doing this work, and they're not top of mind for us. So I want to say, add to your list of stuff to do in your life, pick your issues, and then pick democracy, and make democracy as urgent as your issues, because where we went wrong is failing to connect them for the last few decades.
both a little worried about being Debbie Downers, but I don't think we're that. Thank you so much. I have pages of more questions, and I had a couple for the end, but I'm going to end there because that was a beautiful wrapping up. Thank you so Amy, Siri,
anyone to sleep. I find that hard to believe. Deena, you did a fantastic job. It was a really, really stimulating conversation. I want to just hang out with Dahlia forever. I can't believe you slept in those clothes. And thank you for making it very accessible, and we all learned something today. We hope that you'll stay after and hang out for a glass of wine. Yes. So thank you both. Thank you all. So very quickly, we have our three co-chairs are going to just say a word or two, and then we're going to go downstairs. Maybe Dahlia will sign a book or two, but we're going to hear just a word or two from our three chairs.
We're not going to say much.
Yeah, no.
Because everybody should come to the reception.
Yeah.
But we just wanted to thank everyone. We just wanted to thank everyone for being here today. I for one, I feel like we have a unique platform as female lawyers to educate people and also to do the little things and the big things. And I, for one, am going to continue to be that joyful warrior inside the boardroom because that's where I happen to be. But also I do it in volunteer activities in other ways, teaching kids, etc. These are the things that we need to do. And I just wanted to thank you guys, and I'm going to give it to you.
Okay. So one of the themes that came up a lot of times today were younger people and how to continue the legacy of change that we're all a part of. And we talked about this during our planning. So I want to encourage everyone to think about how you can be a mentor. If you are in this room right now, there is somebody that can learn from you, whether they're here or outside of this room. So please reach out to someone who you know needs help along their path in their career, who wants to make change, and take the time to mentor them. I have several mentors in this room, and they help me get where I am now and be the person I am now. And that's a huge gift we can always give to someone.
My co-chairs, it's been a great ride, and Miel, you know how much we love you. I mean, really love you. And I just want to leave with where we started, which is kindness, generosity, and humanity, and how you can feel it in this room. And what Dahlia just said about, the scarcity, like getting rid of that myth and embracing, the fact that there's enough for all and that we lift everyone up when we believe that. I think that's so powerful. So thank you, Dahlia, for that. And thank you, everyone. And now we're going to reception where we can network, and Dahlia's signing books. Okay, she's going to sign books right over here. All right, thank you all. Thank you.